In this demonstration, you'll learn how to create an overview page for your DiveTab site. A DiveTab overview page provides a high-level view of your data and functions as a launching pad for further exploration of that data. The flexible layout of an overview page allows you to display multiple elements in an arrangement of your choosing. The elements you can display include information arranged in grids, links, images, tabular dimension summaries called tables, and charts. In this video, we'll learn how to create a simple overview page that includes a set of labels and values and a pie chart. On the far left are labels for 4 different dimensions. Next to the labels is a column of numbers, the dim counts for those dimensions. These 2 vertical areas are called grids. Together, the 2 grids show that our dairy business includes 9 product families, 109 different products, 5 sales regions, and 53 sales people. The pie chart shows the total sales broken down by sales region. Now let's take a look at the DiveTab script for this page. The script for our overview page is in a file called overview.divetab. The script is divided into 2 basic parts. The definitions block at the beginning of the script defines the multi-part pieces of content we want to have on our overview page. For example, the dimension labels that appear on the left. Note that you can define the content of the overview page in other parts of the script. You don't need to use the definitions section for this purpose. As a general practice, however, we recommend using the definitions section as a way of preventing unnecessary code duplication. The second area of the script that contains overview page information is the tab block within the data area block. The tab block defines the way the multi-part elements in the definitions block are laid out on the page and allows you to add additional single-part elements to the page. For example, this line of code specifies that the grid labels occupy the second vertical section of the page after the spacer element and determines the width of the section, 20% of the overall page width. Now that we understand the basic purpose of the 2 main areas that contain overview page information, let's go back and take a closer look at the definitions block. Notice that the first tag in the definitions block is the elements tag. This tag indicates the beginning of a new block that identifies the multi-part elements you want to include in your overview page. The first element, the first multi-part piece of content, is the grid that contains the labels for the dim counts. The grid ID allows us to name the set of labels so we can refer to them in the tab block, the part of the code that defines their position on the page. The name we've given this grid element is grid labels. A row tag specifies the contents of a row in the grid. In our example, no content is specified for the first row, which results in a blank first row. The second row tag specifies the display of the text string product family. The third row tag specifies the display of the text string product name, and the fourth row is another blank row. The remaining 2 row tags display the text strings sales region and salesperson. The second element in our overview page is another grid. This grid contains the dim counts that correspond to the dimension labels in the first element, grid labels. We've given this element the grid ID, the name, grid columns. Notice that element grid columns also includes row tags. To ensure that the content of the 2 grid elements line up correctly, the row tags in both elements alternate between displaying content and blank space in the same way. For example, the first row in element grid columns is blank, just like the first row in element grid labels. The second row tag in element grid columns, however, specifies the dim count for dimension product family, to correspond to the label product family in the second row of element grid labels. Let's look more closely at the second row tag. This tag includes a text column tag. The value for this tag, product family count, refers to a calc statement in the C plan. Calc product family count results in a dim count for dimension product family. The text column tag calls for that dim count to be displayed in the second row of element grid columns. Notice also the justification tag below the text column tag. This tag specifies the alignment of the dim count in the grid. In this case, the number will be aligned or justified with the right side of the grid. Almost all the remaining row tags in element grid columns specify dim counts for the remaining dimension labels. Note, however, that the fourth row tag specifies a blank row to match the fourth row tag in the element grid labels, which also specifies a blank row. The third and final element in our overview page is a pie chart. We've given this element the pie chart ID, the name pie chart. The dimension tag specifies the dimension that contains the data we want to graph. The title tag specifies a title for the graph. The column tag specifies the summary column that contains the sales region dimension data we want to graph. Now that we know how to specify the contents of our sample overview page, let's take a look at the data area section, which includes code that governs the arrangement of the content. The first few lines of code in this section are identical to the first few lines of the data area section for other page types, for example, ad hoc pages and dive pages. The tab tag is the start of the section that governs the placement of the grids and pie chart on the page and includes other tags that affect the appearance of the page. Tabs allow the user to cycle through different sets of data in the same display area. Here, for example, we can switch from a tab that displays a table to a tab that displays a graph by clicking or tapping a tab name on the tab bar. The tab tag is required. When an overview page script includes only one tab tag, however, as is the case in our example, the tab bar does not appear in the final overview page and the tab name is ignored. The screen tag lets you further divide the content of a single tab into separate screens. In our example, we have only one screen, so again, no screen name is required, although the tag itself is required. The layout tag specifies the orientation, portrait or landscape, of the final page. When no orientation is specified, as is the case in our example, the default is landscape. Now let's turn our attention to the V-split and H-split tags. The V-split and H-split tags together determine where on the screen an element appears and the amount of space allotted to that element. For example, if we wanted to split our overview page into two horizontal areas of equal size, equal heights, we would start the code section with a V-split tag and then include two H-split tags, each with a % attribute set to 50%. For our overview page, however, we have one horizontal section that occupies 100% of the height of the screen. Now let's look at the code in the H-split section. Each line of code in this section specifies the position and width of an element within our single horizontal area. The position of an element is determined by its placement in the list of elements. The first element in the list is the element that appears at the far left of the page. The second element appears to the right of the first, and so on. In our script, the first line of code in the H-split section defines an element called a spacer, which creates an area of blank space. Because the spacer is the first element in the list, The blank space it creates appears at the far left of the page, and because the percent attribute is set to 3, the spacer occupies 3% of the total width of the screen. The second line of code in the H-split section specifies the element that appears to the immediate right of the spacer. This element is our grid labels element, and because the percent attribute is set to 20, the grid labels occupy 20% of the total width of the screen. The third line of code specifies the element that appears to the immediate right of element grid labels. This element, a line element, creates a vertical line on the screen. Because the percent attribute is set to 1, the line occupies 1% of the total width of the screen. Note that setting the percent attribute for a line to a value greater than 1 creates more white space to the left of the line. The width of the line itself does not change. The fourth line of code specifies the element that appears to the immediate right of the line. This element is our grid columns element. Because the percent attribute is set to 10, the element occupies 10% of the total width of the screen. The fifth line of code produces another vertical line that occupies 1% of the total width of the screen, and the sixth line of code produces a blank space that also occupies 1% of the total screen width. The final line of code specifies the element that appears to the immediate right of the spacer element. This element, the pie chart, occupies 62% of the total width of the screen. So those are the script components that let you create a simple overview page for a DiveTab site.